a warm welcome to the hosts of the Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls and goblins. I remember it like it was yesterday. The full moon had risen. It was October 2024, and me and my co-ghost Tim, I'm Brennan, by the way, sat down to record a podcast, and it was about Silver Bullet. Okay, hi everyone.
I appreciate the effort. The problem is that we'll get here, but you have forgotten that in Silver Bullet the narration is not breathy and scary, but rather sounds like a young woman wistfully remembering the summer when she got her first period.
Yeah, I wasn't not going for that. I just was failing. I was kind of blending, I guess. Also, speaking of, the young woman in question is Tova Feldshuh, the very prominent Broadway actress.
Indeed, and cool.
Yeah, great. Good for
Why
her.
not?
She's not in the movie. It's wild. Anyway, so yeah, this is the second episode of Stephen King month here at Bride of Alternate Ending. We opened with The Mist, which is a movie we both do not like in opposition to the rest of the world. And I have a feeling we're flipping the script with
A little tiny bit, I think. Yes.
Yes, we are zooming further back to 1985 with Silver Bullet.
So yes, instead of a movie that everyone likes and we don't, a movie everyone dislikes. And I think we both had a good time with this one.
I might love this movie. Not love, but like I think it's kind of great. But anyway, so we'll get there. This is based on the 1983 quote-unquote novelette by Stephen King, according to the credits. Cycle of the Werewolf is what it's called, right?
Cycle of the Werewolf. And when we are ready to talk about the source material, I did some research, including reading the novelette.
Oh.
And I have a report.
Oh, okay, great. So I did not have the opportunity to read it. I did have a friend kind of give me a tiny bit of a download on it, though. So I'm excited to get a bigger scope
I will
of that.
say this, given the length of the novel, if I were to riff sufficiently hard, you could probably read it while I was talking during the recording of this podcast.
Yeah, it's like 120 pages or something, right?
The edition I read was 29 pages.
Oh, holy shit.
And it was 129 pages, and there's a reason for that. Should I just talk about the source material?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the extremely awesome, to me, original idea that did not happen, so this is not what the source material was, but it's where it began life, was a wall calendar. And for every month of the year...
Stephen King is just... He's really usual suspecting how he writes. He's like, evil coffee mug. Sorry, continue.
No, it's great. This was the heart of Cocaine King, to be fair.
Oh my god.
So this is probably the idea that sounds great in 1981. It's like, I could write a calendar. People use calendars. But no, so it was going to be a wall calendar. And every month of this calendar, there would be a vivid illustration by Bernie Wrightson, the noted horror comic artist, probably best known for his Swamp Thing comics. Bernie Wrightson would create a vivid image of a werewolf attack, and Stephen King would have a lengthy description of the sort of anecdote leading up to that attack, and they would all be themed around whatever the primary holiday of that month was. So, like, I got eaten by a werewolf on Valentine's Day. Well, I got eaten by a werewolf on Easter.
That's cute.
I think it's a fun idea. The problem is that the blurbs ended up becoming too long for a calendar.
You mean Stephen King couldn't edit himself to
saying
write a single page of text?
I'm saying a coked-up Stephen King was not restraining his writing. So it was instead turned into an illustrated novella. So part of the reason it's 120x pages, it's full of illustrations.
Oh.
And then the same concept for the text. It starts in January, ends on New Year's Eve, and basically walks us through the 1 year happenings in this small town in, guess what state?
I mean, okay, Montana?
Very good. No, the people of a small town in Maine going through werewolf attacks once a month, every full moon, and he takes some liberties with when the full moon falls so he can have it fall on holidays, which of course it would not do.
Yeah.
but you're not getting a full moon on both February 14th and July 4th, but in this universe you do, and he acknowledges as much in an author's afterward. So it's 12 chapters, 12 months. I didn't read the illustrated version. I just read the stripped down text version, which was it was only 29 pages long. But that's basically the story. Is it's a bunch of werewolf attack set pieces, each of them themed to a holiday.
Okay, I mean that's not what this movie is at all. But that's fascinating.
although the set pieces in the movie are the set pieces he wrote, because Stephen King wrote the screenplay to the movie. Yes. So he's been actually somewhat weirdly faithful in adapting his plot-free novella.
Okay. That's interesting. So does it have all of those like King-isms? Does the book have all the King-isms that this movie has? That like all the characters feel like they are directly ripped from like the ideal Stephen King story.
I did not make note of anyone in the novella suggesting that another character is about to make lemonade in his pants, which to me was the reigning Kingism of the movie's screenplay.
Oh my God. And that is not one of those things that Gary Busey just made up, which he apparently was doing.
Yeah, apparently Gary Busey was ad-libbing up a charm, which did it work? Did it not? I don't know. He's not Stephen King. He sounds like a person talking, at least. A weird, unpleasant person, but it's better than nothing.
We'll get to that. But yeah, so any other insights from the novella? Novelette?
I mean, that's basically it. Again, it's basically just descriptions of werewolf attacks. And as I say, you see most of the werewolf attacks that get described in the book, in the movie, with a much more robust, fleshed out, of course, story linking them all, and the year-long cycle having been rather substantially curtailed to a, shall we say, 3-month, 4-month?
Yeah, so we open in May, and it concludes on Halloween.
It concludes on Halloween. I didn't realize, I couldn't figure out if we had opened in May specifically or if it was just kind of generically summer.
I'm pretty sure she was like, I think it says May 1976 on the like Chiron at the beginning.
That could be.
And she's like, school was just about to let out, and there was a whole thing and whatever.
That's true. No, you're right. You're right.
But yeah, also, yeah, randomly this movie is set 9 years before when it came out, which is just, 9 years before.
Yeah.
Which is a very random bit of kind of period dressing, but sure.
I never figured that out, because like it's not like it's trying to visually evoke 1976. It just feels like 1985. And,
yeah, it feels like 1985 and also 1955.
I feel like part of what we're seeing going on is that it wants to get some of that I remember when I was a child action that's kind of all over the 80s, because I think even more telling than Stephen King having written the screenplay, something that's very important about this movie is that it was produced by Dino De Laurentiis.
Oh, I was so excited when I saw that credit.
I had no idea. Like, nothing is more exciting to me than not realizing I'm sitting in front of a De Laurentiis joint and then his name shows up. But that means that it's trying to rip off stuff. And this is a very clearly trying to get on the werewolf cycle that in De Laurentiis fashion was petering out by the time this movie came out. Yep. But you've got You're the Howling and You're an American Werewolf in London back in 1981. This is clearly De Laurentiis trying to get a slice of that action. Mm-hmm. But it's also weirdly like his On Golden Pond or like his Amblin movie, where it's this kind of very highly sentimental story about like small town families.
No, this movie saw E.T. This really movie
saw that. It hired E.T.'s creature designer. Carlo Rambaldi did the werewolf, which was also a name I was excited to see.
Oh, yeah.
Although less excited by that name once the movie was over, I will be honest.
I mean, fair enough. But Carlo Rambaldi did so much. He worked on Barbarella, Deep Red, Neverending Story. Like, I mean, this is a storied career. But basically, kind of everyone involved in this movie is like very important. It's kind of wild.
This movie kind of somehow by accident ended up with the most impressive ensemble cast of any Stephen King adaptation. Is that fair to say?
I think you must be right. Like, I think, yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of like pound for pound quantity, Because like I think
and sometimes by name rather than by the performance they're giving in this film, but there's some heavy fucking hitters in this movie.
yeah, very very much. And I would say like the adult cast of The Shining is great, but it's a smaller cast. So yeah, this might be it. I haven't like really sat down with it, but it's certainly a more exciting ensemble cast than The Mist, which I'm gonna keep bringing up. But yeah, so Silver Bullet. I'll try to hop on the movie synopsis since you talked about the book. But yeah, so yeah, for some reason this movie is narrated by Tova Feldschue as an older version of a 15-year-old girl named Jane Koslaw, who lives in Tarker's Mills in Maine, which was, even though this movie was shot in North Carolina, and there's a lot of people doing Southern accents for some reason. I don't know if Maine is mentioned, but it's a Stephen King story, so it's Maine, you know? So it is the story of the movie is being told by Jane, which is very random because she's barely in the movie for a lot of it. But probably the most important character is Corey Haim as her younger brother, Marty Koslaw, who is paralyzed from his legs are paralyzed. He's in a wheelchair. And he has this unhinged alcoholic uncle played by Gary Busey, which fair.
And I cannot help but make note, the uncle is not alcoholic in the novella, so I'm wondering if that's less of a Stephen King changed it in the script and more of a, well, we hired Gary Busey, so the uncle gets to be an alcoholic now.
Yeah,
it was in Gary's contract.
Gary Busey, I mean, obviously, I don't have that much context for his career. I've seen Predator 2 and I've seen Ginger Dead Man, but that's kind of, and then I've seen that video of him talking about ripping out your endocrine system, but that's kind of the limit of my Gary Busey knowledge. Why did he become? You know,
he had lots of promise and talent. He's very good in his early films, but he set to ruining his brain with alcohol and drugs at a remarkably fast pace, even by Hollywood standards. And so I think, whereas some people, for example, the Gary Busey of the 30s, Lionel or John, I always forget which one of them died of cirrhosis. One of the Barrymore brothers had a lingering, painful, miserable 15 years of slowly destroying his body with alcohol, so we get to see his career kind of collapse. Busey basically goes from hot young actor to insane boozy train wreck in like 18 months.
Wow.
And so you get to this point by like 1985, and it's he has energy.
He does. He's just like, I was watching him in this movie and I'm like, he's just like this unhinged, lumpy whirlwind of a performer. And I'm just like, how did this happen? No, that is good to know. Cause yeah, no, I mean, he's bringing, I don't know what it is, but he brought it.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if I like it, but I know that it is something that this movie is using like oxygen.
Yeah. Well, see, I think that works for this character because he has charisma to the point that you understand why Corey Haim would kind of worship him or see him as a role model in some way. But also because he's the Uncle Red is the only character who really sees Marty as a human being and not a burden or something to be pitied or whatever. So that charisma is there, but there's also this repellent side to him where you see what everyone else is seeing simultaneously.
And it fits because this is a story ultimately about... his subplot is a story about a man who is best friends with a 12-year-old boy because none of the adults will have him, basically.
Yeah.
And that feels correct. It's like the only kind of person who would find you appealing would be a prepubescent child. That is correct, yes.
Yeah, because you get him fireworks and you turn his wheelchair into a motorcycle.
That was,
which is what it is. That is one of the titular Silver Bullets.
I was going to say a motorcycle named Silver Bullet, which was. There's so much in this movie that I love, Brennan.
So yeah, so this, yeah, I don't know. There's this strange family situation. So the brother and sister, Jane and Marty, kind of are at odds. Jane feels kind of left out. Basically, she's coming of age. She's clearly going through puberty from a line that Corey Haim mentions about how she's wearing revealing clothing and acting like nobody ever had tits before she did.
I feel like
which is another very Stephen
King, very 80s movie. That is when you could have a child say that line and it would not immediately feel like you needed to kind of watch out for the feds to bust down your movie set.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so they're kind of at odds. She's a little resentful of how much attention he's getting from their mom and how anything that happens with him is somehow her fault because she has to be responsible for him when she's trying to live a life and be a teenager and whatever. And then so it's also about his and I guess their relationship to their crazy uncle, while a werewolf is tearing people apart around Tarker's Mills, and it is a whodunit, but it really only activates as a whodunit in the same sequence where you discover whodunit.
It reveals whodunit actually sooner than the novella does. Basically, yeah, like there's a scene where someone is just shifty for no reason, and it's like, oh, gotcha.
Yep.
And it's confirmed. It's not even like I got ahead of the movie. It's like, no, the movie tells us pretty much, as you say, in the moment that it becomes a whodunit, it kind of then immediately becomes a how do we stop him?
Yeah. So it's pretty quick. But yeah, so there's a werewolf running around killing various people in very human ways. I've never seen a werewolf do a lot of the things that it's doing here. It definitely has a consciousness more than the average kind of feral werewolf.
The original concept for the movie was that this was going to be a very humanized werewolf. He was going to have dialogue, like sort of bestial but legible English dialogue, which is basically grabbing onto one single description in the book and just assuming that it means like running wild with it, basically. But no, the idea was that it was going to be like a sort of much more were than wolf, which is cool because we don't get those ever in the movies. But I think they ended up thinking it was silly. And they were probably right. Yeah, but the movie is silly, so I don't know that would have been a problem.
Yeah, I think seeing it talk would have been a challenge, certainly for the level of effects that were kind of going on here. But yeah, so there's this like very Black Christmas Dario Argento POV shot of the werewolf like climbing a trellis. Mm-hmm. And the werewolf does use a baseball bat to conk someone on the head. Like, so it's kind of a fascinating composite creature. But anyway, so while the family is at the center of the movie really is more diffuse than that. It's about the town in a very Stephen King way.
The line I meant to use on my Letterboxd review and forgot to, so I will now use it in this episode. We all know that Salem's Lot is Peyton Place with vampires, but what I had never heard was that Silver Bullet was Peyton Place with werewolves.
Ooh. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah, and it I think it really works the way that this town is characterized, and it really has a strong sense of place.
No, I fully agree. One of the things that King is good at, and it's easy to bag on King as an author, at least it is for me, and certainly as a screenwriter. But one of the things he is good at is stepping like back to the god's eye view of a city or a town rather, and sort of sketching out what makes this town go. And I feel like this is a really good example of that, right?
Yeah, it's really solid. I mean, that's something that I have come to prize in movies, where it really feels like you're stepping into a fully realized world. And not every character has an arc or a huge thing, but they're all distinct, and you know what they're up to and kind of how they're feeling about things. But anyway, so that's kind of the basic thrust of Silver Bullet. It's a little diffuse because it is based on that.
It's based on a calendar. What do you expect?
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that the calendar element is very much lost. the way this movie plays out, there are certain signifiers that it drops of time passing, but it feels like it takes place over a week instead of 5 months or 3 months or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's less that it feels like it takes place between May and October, and more that it takes place in some sort of odd pocket universe where Halloween happens a week after the 4th of July.
Yeah, definitely. Because I wasn't catching on to the passage of time at first, and I was like, how many full moons are there actually in a row? Because they just keep every night is a full moon. But yeah, then by the time it was Halloween, I was like, oh, we did start in May. And they had mentioned 4th of July, and like there's like an October carnival that got canceled. So there's like little...
There's also at least one screw up, I'm pretty sure, because there's a close-up on a newspaper that I thought was specifically trying to like make us notice the date, which was September. And at that point, it was early enough in the movie that I had not yet clocked that it would not be the 1 per month cycle.
Oh, okay.
But so we see this, it's September, it's like, yeah, is this the 4th death? That feels like it could be the 4th death. I buy that. And then I didn't really think about it again. And then it is later very clearly pinned down in dialogue that it is July. So the one time they actually try to like present the passage of time, they fuck it up because, again, this film was brought to us by Dino De Laurentiis.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But also because it's brought to us by Dino De Laurentiis, it's a little bit unhinged. It's a little bit dangerous. And it's really
well. Again, it's a combination of An American Werewolf in London and E.T. Like that doesn't happen. That doesn't make sense. No one would do that, and yet it's sitting in front of all of us to be watched at our leisure.
Yeah, it is this like. For a long time, Corey Haim is just in this charming small town family drama. And then eventually he's like, maybe it's a werewolf that's killing people. And it sure is. But so it is almost like Tammy and the T-Rex in the way that the horror elements invade the kind of bucolic elements in the first half of the movie. Which I don't mind, but like this is a movie where, as you mentioned in your Letterboxd review, which I did see, a werewolf knocks a guy's head off within 1 minute of the movie starting.
The movie wants to comfort you and let you know that it is here for you. It is taking your needs seriously. Here's a dude's head getting not just knocked off by a werewolf, knocked off in a beautiful slow motion arc against the crystal dark black night sky. We just see this head prop kind of lilting through the air, and it's like, oh movie, you saw me trudging up the hill and you greeted me at the door with cookies. Thank you so much for that.
And say what you will about the werewolf effects, which are fine and utilized reasonably well, but not particularly realistic looking.
The movie has correctly learned the lesson that if you show us never more than 3/4 of a second of the monster, we'll assume it looks good.
Yes, exactly. I think that works really well for the movie, but the werewolf in and of itself is a little not perfect. But basically all of the human gore is incredible. That severed head is great, and then you get that hereditary shot of ants crawling on the severed head the next morning. It's so cool.
The only problem I have with the severed head being the thing that happens in the first minute, it sets a bar that the movie does not approach thereafter.
I hear you in terms of like the kind of bigness of it. I think I agree, but I like at least 2 of the other kills I think are equally memorable to me.
No, I don't want to say that none of the other kills are good. I think it's the best kill. And you know, that's a little bit of a bummer, but no, the makeup work here is great. And even you know, a scene that should not work given the movie's budget and ambitions, there's a nightmare where we see a room full of like 24 werewolves, and that too is being shot in low lighting with a lot of quick cutting, so it feels good, even if I were I would not want to freeze frame my way through that scene, shall we say.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. But I guess we're talking about the werewolf. I will talk about the second death now, just skip ahead, which is a woman who is pregnant and spurned by her lover, who is deciding to take a bunch of pills and off herself. Yes. This is the trellis scene where the werewolf climbs
she is
up.
saved from the sin of suicide by a werewolf, if you follow me.
Yeah, she sure is. But I thought that scene was excellent.
It was, and it wasn't like showy. It wasn't like, look at these gore effects, but like the scratches on her back were just like beautifully done and very terrifying and unpleasant to think about, I thought.
Yeah, I completely agree. It reminded me very much of Tina's death in Nightmare on Elm Street, where she's, well, obviously, this woman's not on the ceiling, but the way that the claws kind of rip her open in this really visceral way. And it is, in a bedroom, this kind of like sudden intrusion of violence. But also, so you're seeing the werewolf. This is the first time you really get a look at the werewolf, but it is in these like jarring quick cuts where you see like a half a second of a snarl, and it's not there. It's clear if you really pay attention, where it's like, okay, so we're really only moving one bit of the werewolf here and another one here, but it just creates this kind of jagged editing that is just really propels the scene. I think it's really good.
It's really good. It gives this sense, God forgive me, it almost gives you a sort of Jaws opening-esque sense of, it's so violent you can't really get your bearing. You can just every now and then get the impression of there's some teeth.
Yeah.
So it's like the editing is kind of supporting the chaos and violence that the woman is herself experiencing in those dismal seconds at the end of her life.
Yes, very much. And I will say, so this is the only feature directed by Daniel Attias, who immediately went into television.
Yep, TV guy. Yeah.
Yeah, which is wild. I mean, I've seen all 20 episodes of Beverly Hills 90210 that he directed. But he's done everything.
So tell us, what are his auteurist stamps?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, 90210 is one of the maybe the biggest show that is the absolute worst at a technical level.
Okay.
So many boom mic flubs in that show. It is wild. I don't know if they're from his episodes or not, but he was like a guiding force in the first 3 seasons of that show. But he's currently directing, or he recently directed The Boys. He currently just directed an episode of Tell Me Lies. He did Castle Rock, another King connection. In the 80s, he directed episodes of Wolf, which I think he was suited for.
There you go.
But I think he does a tremendous job.
Yeah, no, it's
in this movie.
It's great low budget directing, and I think I wish he had made more films. I'll be honest. I think he knows the tricks. They're not new tricks. I mean, this is someone who I think if Roger Corman had been able to take another young director under his wing, I would have rather seen Daniel Attias get stuck with Corman than with De Laurentiis, because I think he had something. It's very functional directing, but it's very good functional directing.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing, and it is functional. But I think there are so many things about it. Maybe it's just because I've been watching modern stuff. Like I've recently been watching the Marvel show Agatha All Along, which has never heard of a light. But the lighting in this movie is kind of exquisite.
It's kind of good. I had a friend call in the middle of the movie, so I just paused it. And we were talking about how like cool looking it is, and how like in the 80s you could have movies that had lights for night exteriors. Ain't that a trip? And I just the random frame I had paused it on, which was a shot of the outside of the house when Corey Haim is tooling up in his motorized wheelchair, just like looked good. Like it had some dappled lighting cast over the foreground, and there was like a nice spotlight over the door in the house to draw your attention, but also it was kind of shaped by shadows. Like looks nice, this movie.
Yeah. I was gonna say dappled is the word I wrote probably the most in my notes. It's dappled as shit, this movie.
So much dappled. Well, that's how you evoke rural Maine. He had dapple shit.
Oh yeah, for sure. But also, yeah, in the nighttime scenes, you can see the things that are necessary to see.
Even in the werewolf nightmare, where the whole point of the lighting is to make sure you can't see too closely how many of the werewolves are basically just people with felt on their face. You're still being encouraged to note the space and the bodies, as opposed to just here's a purple murk.
Yeah, which again, Agatha all along. There is a broomstick chase sequence in that is entirely purple murk, like literally just that. And I'm like, what the fuck am I looking at?
I will say, I know that the MCU is a big thing with lots of technical people in it. The first time I ever watched a sequence, it's easy to talk about, like, oh man, lighting is so bad. The first time I ever had seen a sequence in a modern tentpole that was genuinely, I thought, not watchable because of how poor the lighting and editing were, was in Spider-Man Homecoming. So, like, I do think the MCU also has a unique problem with not lighting things.
It does, but it is an incredibly common thing.
Oh,
like
good
there's
Lord,
a thing.
yes.
Oh yeah, but there's I write for Screen Rant. I write news. And a lot of the time I have to edit the header images for the pieces that I write. And usually it's a screenshot from whatever the thing I'm writing about, or it's plucked from the thing I'm writing about. And there are certain movies and shows that I've had to write about recently where I cannot find a single still image that I can edit into looking like anything with strong saturation or contrast. It's just this murky shit that I have to blast up to the point that it's like basically just pixelated nothing. And there are at least 5 ongoing things that I've been having to write about recently where I can't find a single image that I can make look good.
That's brutal. Oh my god. We are living through a bad age. We really are.
Yeah. It's really bad. I first encountered this. I started writing for them right around the time that new Hellraiser movie was coming out.
Oh yes.
And that's a pretty bad exemplar of that trend.
By the time spooky season is over, I will have watched the new Salem's Lot, Keeping It in King, and
that looks.
I am just
unlit as hell.
I'm stealing my body. It's like this is going to be the ugliest movie I watch this month. I know it.
Yeah, it's really grim, and there are movies that look great that come out now, but most of them are not having a good time. Anyway, but yeah, so when the full moon was out, when it was nighttime, I was like, I can see. It's beautiful.
And this is not a movie that is special, right? Like, it's just a movie, but it has such really nice nighttime cinematography.
Yeah,
Brennan, our standards have been lowered, I think.
I think they have. I don't know. I appreciated it more because of our current time, but I do think it is genuinely good lighting. I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, we're winning an Oscar for this, or like, I don't know how many independent images of Silver Bullet are genuinely like, this is an awe-inspiring aesthetic image, but all of it is competent, and a lot of it is much above that.
Absolutely. No, very, very nice movie to look at. Does I think a really good job of, and again, since the action is all about what happens at night when there's a werewolf on the loose, it really, I think, needs to get that good sense of night atmosphere, but not necessarily like a creepy crawly night atmosphere, just like night, just summer nights, and I think it's quite good at that.
Yeah, and well, because that's the Stephen King / Amblin thing too, where it's not that scary of a movie. It's an adventure.
Yes.
It's a childhood adventure. But anyway, so what the fuck? I don't even know where we started from that we ended up here. But anyway, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you like that we haven't pointed to?
I mean, we have alluded to this film having a hell of a cast, but we have only mentioned Corey Haim and Tova Feldscha and
Gary Busey.
And that's not even hitting any of my top 3 names from this ensemble, I wouldn't say.
For sure. Okay, so do throw one out. Hit me with your number 1.
I mean, when am I ever going to feel like the presence of Terry O'Quinn in a movie is anything other than just a gift from God himself.
Oh my goodness, yes. As Sheriff Joe Howler, get it?
Yep.
He's that character is absolutely useless and does nothing, but Terry O'Quinn is so potent in it.
I know, it's wild, right? Because he's literally just the useless cop, and he could have been played by any pluck a guy off of a corner in West Hollywood, and instead I feel the cop's self-loathing at his own ineffectual lack of ability to stop this, but also the kind of rage he gets at the implication that anyone might hold him accountable for being ineffectual. It's kind of a really great performance that we see for like 5 scenes because he's not an important character.
No, he's not. But yeah, he is incredible. And there's this part where the one kill that we never really see much of is the death of Corey Haim's friend,
Right.
Who's another young man who's like probably 12 or whatever. And we find out that this character has died because he was flying a kite with a happy face on it. And then it kind of smash cuts to night, and Terry O'Quinn is dragging that kite behind him, and it's covered in blood.
Yeah.
And he has this glassy-eyed, just, I cannot process what I have just seen look on his face. That is, it really just punches you in the gut. That is a really, really good performance of that scene.
It absolutely was. Again, he's doing something in here that's just really, really working for me, and I mean, he always does. That's, you hire Terry O'Quinn because you need someone who will give you good shit without you having to micromanage it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's why you hire character actors.
And I will also say, Terry O'Quinn is, of course, an American treasure on the Mount Rushmore of 80s character actors. But since you bring up the friend's death, actor that I've seen in things, I looked him up and I was like, well, I've seen this film, I've seen that. But I did not recognize him. Kent Broadhurst, who plays the father of the dead friend. I thought he was really good. Like, he doesn't have a lot to do either, but like, well, what did you think before I go nuts talking about this performance?
I'm very 50-50 on him. Certain line readings, I was like, I don't get what he's going for at all. But when he's really digging into the grief of his character, he's doing this weird... It's a very weird performance that I found very effective. It is this kind of like unrestrained... he can't really control the kind of like tidal wave of things that's going on inside of him. And he's making a lot of noises and doing a lot of emphasis that's just like uncanny and strange because he's like not in control of himself.
I really liked that. It felt to me kind of like the performance was trying to sell. He is going to be very angry because if he feels any other feeling, he doesn't know what to do with it. So we have like this veneer of angry with all of this other complicated back and forth self-negating stuff underneath it. I agree. It's a very weird performance, but I liked it because it's so not what I expected from we see the father of the dead child weeping beat that I was expecting to happen at this point.
Yeah, it's not a screaming up to the heavens, shouting no kind of performance. Like, it is very unique.
Yes.
And I mean, also, I'm going to throw out a name. Obviously, I have Everett McGill as Reverend Lowe. I mean, he's my number one. What?
Big Ed.
Yeah, Big Ed, obviously, but also I think of him as Daddy from People Under the Stairs, primarily. But that's just me.
That's just because you are an uneducated heathen who doesn't love Twin Peaks as much as it should be loved.
I will wear that badge, not with pride, but also not with shame.
Okay.
I am aware of Twin Peaks. I've seen the first season, never saw the second one or that new one. I'm sorry, everybody. Or Firewalk with Me. I'll do it eventually. But I know enough about Twin Peaks, and I enjoyed it. But I was a kid. My dad was showing it to me, and we just never got around to finishing it. But Everett McGill is great.
He's really, really good. And well, you go first because I've talked now twice about actors. But
well, I think we have to lift the spoiler.
Well, that's what I was going to say, and that's when I stopped myself. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna do it. Everett McGill's Reverend Lowe is the werewolf, and he knows it. But so there are scenes where he as a human is menacing Corey Haim and or his sister that are really genuinely terrifying.
Yes.
There is a confrontation inside a covered bridge that has been condemned, where Everett McGill is kind of slowly approaching Corey Haim, and his wheelchair motorcycle has run out of gas. But he's doing this thing where he's like clenching his hands together and they're going completely flat, and he's just kind of like mashing them, and it's this very unusual choice that's very terrifying. Anyway, what stands out to you the most about Everett?
I mean, I think just sort of what you already said, but it's worth repeating. He is genuinely threatening. And it's this great mixture of genuinely threatening because he doesn't want to be found out as a werewolf, but also genuinely threatening because he's just like a bad dude. And I feel like I'm more scared of him as a person than I ever am of him as a werewolf.
Absolutely.
Which is both, I mean, sort of just on the screenplay, but it is really, McGill's performance is so cold. Like, there's just such ferocious meanness in that performance. And he also, at a certain point, and this is how they figure out he's the werewolf gets shot in the eye. And then later on we see Everett McGill with an eye patch, and he looks so fucking freaky with an eye patch.
He does. He really does. I will say that sequence I really liked also. Great of sequence. The sisters going around town pretending to, well, she is collecting cans for like the recycle drive that the church is doing, but she's using that as an excuse to check everyone's eyes to see who's missing one. And there's all these. Yeah.
The part I loved was when she's in the barber shop and she like slowly pulls the towel down from a guy's face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a choice. But yeah, there's all these fun shots of cameras panning past both of people's eyes, and there's the one I like the most is she knocks on a door and the door opens and the door slowly reveals one eye and then the other. Mm-hmm. And again, this is Daniel Adios doing a great job guiding this movie.
Yeah.
But anyway, but yeah, so Everett McGill, great. That sequence, great. This movie is just kind of great. Anyway, any other actors you want to throw out in this conversation, or have we kind of...
I think we've covered the big hitters. I don't know that we necessarily have dealt with Gary Busey. And I don't know that we ever could.
We got to circle back around. I want to talk about Busey and Haim in this movie. But yeah, Gary Busey, I mean, obviously we talked about he improvised a lot of his dialogue. Well, I guess, I mean, the thing I have to say I already said, where it's like, it's that combination of repellent and charismatic that I think drives that character really well. But it is an odd performance. What's your take on that?
I mean, I already sort of gave it. Here's a dude who fried the shit out of his brain. And I mean, there was an accident involved there as well. Like, I think he actually got hooked on pain meds at that point. I forget the exact details of the story. But like rough...
It was in a motorcycle accident, I believe.
Yeah. Rough, weird couple years there left Gary Busey as the sort of odd fellow of the subsequent 40 years. It stands out in this movie in a good way, because one of the things Stephen King's always tries to do, and I think he does it to very mixed success. He tries to have colorful figures in his stories and his screenplays, and his colorful figures tend to be so one note. I mean, we just saw, did we not, The Mist with its
we sure did
highly nuanced portrayal of small town fundamentalist religious type. I think Stephen King tries to make like interesting weirdos, but he very often veers off into like cartooniness. And we even get some of that in here. I mean, I already kind of made fun of the lemonade in your pants line, which is just quintessential. Oh, you just like having a potty mouth, but you don't actually know how people who have real potty mouths talk. Like, no one is worse at writing swears than Stephen King. And I think it's kind of charming. honestly. But
Yeah, I mean, it kind of fits the like every town, anytime vibe of it. It's very childhood.
yes. But into this like attempt to do that, along comes Gary Busey, who just is that. And like he is who Stephen King wants to be able to write, but he just has it. He is it. So he's just kind of coming off. He's riffing. He, as we said, has improvised a ton of his lines. Apparently, they did it both ways. They had him just like go, but they also had him read the script. And both Atias and King agreed what he's just doing is better. So you have this kind of utterly unpredictable figure. You never know. Is he just going to kind of be normal for 5 minutes, or is he going to start ranting and screaming and saying lewd, off-color things? It's very nerve-wracking to watch.
Yeah, like to the point that he is the biggest second place candidate for being the werewolf in the whodunit, very much.
I mean, he has to be.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he has to be. But also it's like he comes around once a month,
Right.
and you're like, oh, okay. Right. But even at the point where it was extremely clear that Everett McGill was the werewolf, I was a little bit suspicious that Gary Busey was the werewolf.
There were just two werewolves.
Yeah. But yes, no, and he's just going. Yeah, and to the point, like you're really with Marty's mom of like, maybe you shouldn't be talking like this.
Right?
To
Like maybe you should not be permitted to be in the same structure as a 12-year-old boy. Like,
yeah, and they're playing this card game, and he's just riffing this really weird thing where he's like, piss on the Indians, piss on the Phillies, piss on the thing. And I was like, oh, all right, well, this is great. I don't know what's
I have no
happening.
idea why it showed up. Apparently they were using baseball cards to bet, I gathered, subtextually, or from context, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like, that's a great moment where it just comes out of nowhere. And I don't know. I found the performance hair-raising, and I liked that about it.
Yeah.
It's like, at what point is Gary Busey going to just like fling a bottle at Corey Haim? And I don't mean at what point is the uncle going to fling a bottle. I mean, at what point is Gary Busey going to fling a bottle at Corey Haim?
Yeah. But no, it does give the movie so much energy whenever he's on screen. But since we're speaking of Corey Haim, we got to talk about him. This is his pre The Lost Boys. Like I kind of wish he fought more monsters in movies because like it was just those two.
I think this is the film prior to Lucas, which was kind of his big star-making role. And yeah, no, he's quite good in this. I haven't seen Lucas. I haven't actually seen much of his stuff, but he is a very good child actor in a period when that was a real crapshoot if you were going to get a good child actor or not. And this very movie, I think, gives us other child actors that are not maybe so dialed in.
Oh, certainly not. I thought Megan Follows' sister Jane was very spotty.
She was very spotty, and
for one
and the
thing.
friend was flat out bad, I thought.
Oh yeah, for sure. But Corey Haim, so Silver Bullet is actually kind of an ongoing marathon that Ben and I have been doing of Corey Haim movies from the late 80s and early 1990s. He's a fascinating figure to me. Because he's obviously this quite good child actor. I don't think he's one of our greatest thespians in the world, but he's so reliable. And as a child actor, he's just like, really gets what he's doing. And then as a teenager, he's basically instantly given this cadre of lead roles, mainly in direct-to-video movies, but or movies opposite Corey Feldman, who I find to be a repugnant screen presence in an interesting way. But Corey Haim, we've been kind of over the course of the year just watching random movies of his from that period. And he elevates the material every time. We watched this bizarre movie where he was the kid of a like bank robber called Fast Getaway. That movie's is certainly on the scale of a direct-to-video action comedy from like 1993. It's pretty great.
Okay.
And Corey Haim is a big part of that. And I find him to be a pretty good physical comedy actor. in a lot of ways, and he had a lot, and it's wild to me that he was basically allowed to be a lead for so long in a way that child actors don't very often. And I think that it was right that happened, even though a lot of the stuff that he made was very janky and weird and forgotten by history.
Yes. And I do think Corey Haim is obviously, like, as a sort of cautionary tale to all the young child actors out there. I think it's a kind of mixture of the talent is so real that even as, I mean, talk about people who start frying their brains as quickly as they can. The talent is there, and I think that's why he does keep getting those roles even after he is basically completely gone to drugs and alcohol, because the talent outs, right? Like the talent will out. And at the same time, I have to assume that's why he was making direct-to-video movies and why he didn't like transition into actual theatrical features as a young adult. There's just too erratic of a presence. But no, in terms of
like by the
go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, by the end of his career, he had an uncredited role in Wishmaster 2. Like, that was just kind of what happened to Corey Haim.
But, like, in terms of the on-screen discipline and the presence, like, he's really, really good. And he's carrying this movie. He knows he's carrying this movie. I get the impression he is probably, the character as written, is slightly younger than he is. Like, they don't...
I certainly believe so, because he was, like, quite a bit older looking in The Lost Boys, which was 2 years later.
Right, because he's 13 when this film was in production, I believe. And I get the impression the character's
would make
like
the
10.
most sense. She specifically says the character's 11, if I recall correctly.
So, like, that's a lot. Those 2 years are big, right? And I think that he's doing a really good job of kind of playing up the Disney Amblin, wide-eyed, summer sentimental thing while still credibly, acting against Gary Busey, which that has to be a terrifying experience if you're a child.
Oh, my God.
And you have no idea what's coming. And
he'd only made 2 features before this in supporting roles.
Right. So, like, I mean, just being able to navigate those scenes, and those scenes are a really substantial percentage of this movie, right? Scenes where it's basically not two-handers between those two necessarily, but certainly they are the two focal point characters in a given scene. So being able to not just survive that, but match it, like when whatever Gary Busey's feeding him, he turns into his character's enthusiasm for this terrifying weird man, and kind of reflecting it in a way that children reflect the adults around them.
Yeah, and you need a Corey Haim in this role if you have a Gary Busey in that role.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
Because otherwise it's too scary. Like, you would feel genuinely worried for the child in a way that you're not for Marty, because you know that Marty gets his uncle and it's just their relationship is so specific and doesn't exist without those two actors, but certainly doesn't work without those two actors.
No, for sure. So it's weirdly, given all the things it is, given that it's a werewolf movie, given that it's just this kind of very strange family film from the 80s knockoff, it really works as a character piece because you have really good actors inhabiting the characters and being very thoughtful, or at least instinctive in really productive ways is probably a better way of describing Gary Busey's performance than saying he's thoughtful. But, like, I feel these characters, I like these characters, or at least I like them as movie figures, and it's giving me something very meaty to latch onto during the scenes where the werewolf is not killing people with a baseball bat in beautifully thick fog.
Easily have been, oh my God, yeah, and those scenes could easily have been the moments where you feel like the movie has screeched to a halt, and it just doesn't. They do feel like different movies for a long time, but different movies that are both good.
Right, exactly.
And again, just to kind of bring it back to Daniel Arias, I think he's shepherding this movie really well. He's shepherding these performances. He's kind of making it feel maybe not holistic, but like an experience here, a single experience that is all enjoyable.
Yes.
I want to say I was thinking about it, and there is one shot that I think is just like genuinely aesthetically kind of bowled me over. It is in Everett McGill's nightmare where his flock is turning into wolves. And there's a shot where Brady's dad, that actor that you brought up, he's, I think, either starting to turn into a werewolf or he's just like kind of shrieking and giving the effect that he's about to. And you see him framed behind this kind of guttering candle and the kind of wavy heat lines that are formed by that. And that was a great shot. I thought that was really cool to look at.
No, that is really good. I don't know that I can pluck out a favorite shot like that, but certainly a lot of... I mean, I think the best shots do mostly accrue to the scenes that are more horror than just, like, watching the family pet around, but some very, very good stuff of just nighttime spooky movie vibes. I talked about the thick, foggy scene. I also really like the scene where Corey Haim confronts the werewolf on a bridge with fireworks.
Really, yeah, that seems
really,
great.
really nice, like slow, the werewolf like approaching us sort of feel. Which I think is done more in the cutting than the blocking. Like I don't think we actually see the werewolf walk towards the camera, but we get this sense of it getting closer.
Yes. And there's another when Everett McGill is trying to run over Corey Haim in his car on another bridge. That's a really genuinely like action-packed. You can feel the danger that this character is in. I don't know. There's not a lot I don't like about this movie. I can point to like 1.5 things that I genuinely was like, I don't like that.
I'm curious what those 1.5 things are.
Well, one was the timeline, which I do think was not handled very well. And the other thing was that it did take me out of the scene. There's a scene where the character we've never mentioned, but the kind of like alcoholic father of a girl that Corey Haim has a crush on, he gets eviscerated by the werewolf in his greenhouse. In another very cool death, he gets the werewolf bursts up through the floorboards and the guy gets dragged down, but he gets impaled in the stomach on one of the broken boards, which is really cool.
That was really good.
But during the lead up to that, before he has encountered the werewolf, there's this spider it's a jump scare spider where it kind of like falls from a web in front of his face.
Sure.
And then it clearly gets dragged back out of frame by a PA. Like, I'm just like, what is this even supposed to be? It's just a very kooky kind of like cheap haunted house trick
Sure.
that took me out of it a little bit.
I will say I only have one flaw that really stood out to me. It is unfortunately a very prominently placed flaw. This movie's final scene suggests that it had a really different emotional arc than the one I experienced. Because it's a movie that never quite understands why Jane is the narrator.
No, it's very strange
I
that
think
she
other
is. I don't
than that
understand.
Tell the Full Show was like available, and they were like, "Hey, you're famous. Be in our movie." And like having the end of the movie be her basically saying, "And that's how that summer my brother and I learned to love each other more." It's like, what?
Yeah.
Where was this as of 75 seconds ago?
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's like there are bits of it. It is weird that that's the thing that it ends on.
It's not her
about
story. That's the thing. And like
yeah, it's a movie about Marty and his uncle.
And the movie tries to imply that the whole movie has been about Jane realizing that she needs to back off, and not one scene of the movie has been about that. Like it's been about the tension between them, but Jane learning things has not been in the movie's wheelhouse. But I will say, I want to mention one other thing I really liked, so I can end on an up note, because I forgot to bring this up earlier, talking about just how simple but good the directing is here. The movie really holds off on letting us realize that Corey Haim is in a wheelchair. And I think I just kind of liked that they introduced, because the whole movie, right, is about him not wanting the adults around him to think of him first as the kid in the wheelchair. So he gets a full scene talking about throwing a snake at his sister, basically. And we realize at the end of it that he's been in a wheelchair. But we get this sense of like, here's this kind of young, maybe slightly bratty kid. Mm-hmm. And only then do we get the reveal, which I think works. Because again, the point is that he's that bratty kid. The point is not that he's in a wheelchair.
Yes. Oh, that is a great point. Yeah, and there's... I'm sorry. I got really caught up in a whirlwind. I was like, okay, so we are wrapping up. What's the last thing I want to say? And I was looking at my notes and I was like, oh, there's 4 things.
We got no one but us sets how long this episode goes. If you want to say all 4 of your things, you can say all 4 of your things.
Okay, I think I'll try to rattle through them really quickly though. I think they're all under the umbrella of just like this movie's well directed or good or whatever. One of them, great smash cut after the werewolf attack from the fog to just 4 coffins lined up at a funeral.
Really
at a church.
great smash cut. I remember that one.
That was really funny. There is, I do want to say Terry O'Quinn's death is also one of my favorites. He gets beat to a pulp with the bat, and that's very bloody and visceral and gross and cool. There's a scene in the bar where they're discussing mob justice, essentially, which they call private justice, which sounds like the name of a bad direct-to-video action movie, actually. But that scene was basically like a more concise, much better version of the thing that The Mist is doing, which is about people talking about how society should be shaped in a single location and 2 different factions. And then the last thing I want to say is the thing that's probably funniest, probably not intentionally, is when Corey Haim's like, okay, we've discovered that Everett McGill is the werewolf. I know how to solve this. And he cuts out magazine letters to make a ransom note that says, I know what you are. I know what you did. Why don't you kill yourself? Which is really funny.
Yes.
He's just bullying Everett McGill through with poison pen letters.
That is actually a major part of the novella. Is that character trying to like gaslight the werewolf into killing himself? I said that the novella has no plot. It does actually sort of have a plot, but I think it's definitely presented as being funny there. So I think it might have intentionally been funny.
Okay. Yeah, where it's like this is how a kid would try to handle it.
Right. Exactly.
But it was very amusing. Anyway, that's my quick lightning round of things that I liked about Silver Bullet.
There's so much to like about this film, as you and I think everyone agrees. No one would dispute this opinion. This is such a better movie than The Mist, so I'm really glad we ended on a high note.
Mm-hmm. And I think people were excited about Silver Bullet on the alternate ending Discord, which is great. I think that speaks to the quality of people we have gathered. But yeah, I was looking through. It's got pretty mediocre reviews. I think it made basically no money.
It did not make money theatrically, but it did make money on video.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. That would happen in the 80s. It certainly did not hurt Corey Haim because he went on to The Lost Boys, which I imagine doesn't happen without him having been in Silver Bullet.
I would imagine.
Yeah. But anyway, I really liked this movie. This was really fun.
I had a really good time. It really did what I needed it to do. I have a list of Stephen King adaptations ranked because I rank things. That's what I like to do. And actually, those of you who follow me on Letterboxd, I will probably be publishing what exists of that list after I see the new Salem slot. So maybe follow me if you're not. I can't believe I just did that. What a craven plug. But I will say, as I decided where to slot Silver Bullet onto this list, I had a moment where I had to decide, am I the kind of person who thinks that Silver Bullet is better than the Brian De Palma Carrie? Because that doesn't feel like a safe... I don't want to be that kind of person, but maybe I am.
Ooh,
and I
love that.
Now that I've teased it, I guess I'll say Silver Bullet and Carrie are in adjacent slots. I'm not going to tell you what order they're in. Watch Letterboxd.
Ooh. Yeah, that is a thought experiment and a half. Because I think, Carrie has higher highs and lower lows.
Yeah, I would agree.
Kind of conspicuously.
I mean, talk about movies with good casts.
Oh my God, yeah.
But also.
But anyway, yeah, I cannot wait for that list to drop. I do follow you on Letterboxd, as everyone should. Anyway, I think that's going to do it. We'll catch up with you again in November. We don't know what we're doing yet. I'll let you know. But yes, stay tuned for that. But before that, have a happy Halloween.
Ooh, spooky.
Bye, everybody.